Your speaker today is Mark Schumann. Mark has been at the communications game for a number of years. In fact, at this year's World Conference, he celebrated his 35th anniversary in the association. But he was only 10 years old when he joined, according to Mark. Mark has a varied career that includes more than 25 years with the consulting firm Towers Perrin, where he was the leader of the global communication practice, as well as in-house assignments at Frontier Airlines, Total, and more recently as the interim head of marketing for a network of hospitals in New England in the U.S. He has written 2 books on employer brand, Brand from the Inside, and Brand for Talent, and was the #1 rated speaker at this year's World Conference. In his spare time for the past 15 years, he has been a working movie critic for some 22 newspapers in print and online in New England. I'd now like to turn the call over to Mark.
Hey there. Thank you all so much for joining and for your flexibility in the rescheduling of this discussion from last week to this week, which enabled me to celebrate my birthday, which we've already established was a high number. Thank you so much for also focusing this time on yourselves and in your career. We are so, I think, predisposed in our work in communications to think about other people, to try to figure out others' challenges and manage their issues, that we're not always as good about looking at ourselves. And so it has been a lot of fun the past few days to think through some ideas to share with you today that are all about us and about what it takes to have a long career and what it takes to have a satisfying career and what it takes to have a challenging career. So before we get started, I want you to just kind of take a moment and close. Now, you don't have to close your eyes, but if you can look up at the sky, whatever, and imagine a conversation you would like to be a part of, whether it is someone you work with, whether it's Oprah, whether it is the CEO of your organization, whether it's the president of the country. Just imagine a conversation you would like to have and consider for a moment what you wish that conversation was all about. Those kinds of exercises to visualize where we want to go and where we want to be and who we want to talk with and what kind of contributions we want to make, I think they are absolutely essential to our mapping out a career. I don't think a career is something you can necessarily plan for. I think we build certain skills. We certainly collect experiences. But a career is something that we are open to. And if we do what it takes to develop a keen insight and a strong instinct, we can make the most of opportunities. Careers are filled with defining moments. And so what we're going to do over the next several minutes is take a look at what we can each strengthen in ourselves to make the most of the opportunities presented to us, the result being a career that satisfies us as well as what makes significant contributions to the places that we work. So, and we will provide these slides, so you don't have to take these down. But there are certain realities that distinguish a career in communications from, let's say, a career in medicine. Every analogy right now in my life is about medicine since I am doing this gig for a network of hospitals. But the fact is, in communications, everybody thinks they can do what we do. And most of them think they can do it just as well. I get tickled. I have meetings many times during the day with doctors, and doctors are very quick to tell me what should be done in how we communicate or how we market. I never suggest to a doctor how he or she should do surgery. And I'm always a little bit perplexed at the mystique surrounding some things and not surrounding others. But as long as we can recognize this, kind of chuckle about it, and use it as an indicator that among everything else we need to bring in any situation, a good sense of humor and a good sense of humility is about as important as anything, because the fact is everybody does think they can do what we do. The people we work with don't always know what they need. this is where it is a little bit like medicine, where I might go into the doctor and say, this hurts, or I have this pain, or this doesn't quite work the way I want it to. Many times people come to us prescribing the solution, not always aware of the problem they're actually trying to solve. So how many times do we hear, oh, I just need that brochure, I just need that website, and they immediately jump to the tactics. A saying we love to say around here is, and would you like fries with that advertisement, as they tell us what they want. But the fact is that people can't always describe what hurts, and so we have to be able to look underneath and behind and around the words that we hear. And we have to really probe to find what is the it that they are trying to solve. Because unless we help people find the it, we don't have much luck in helping them get it resolved in a way that helps the organization and helps them. A career is a series of defining moments. There are wake-up calls we receive at different times in our career. There are opportunities where it all comes together in a single moment, and we can't predict when those are going to be. The most recent one that I had, and I feel very lucky, as I'm sure many of you do, that life has been filled with a lot of really interesting challenges. But I work in the hospital where I'm working now. This gig is outside of New York City by about an hour and a half in southern Connecticut. You may have heard of a town called Newtown, where this horrible shooting occurred last December the 14th. Well, Newtown is one town away from where I'm sitting now at the hospital in Danbury, Connecticut. And so when that shooting occurred that Friday morning, we were the hospital that was immediately brought to a crisis mode because we would be receiving any survivors, anyone shot in that horrible event. And within about 6 minutes, we had 120 medical personnel ready to bring in the survivors. Unfortunately, only 3 came in. That moment, however, became a defining moment for me as a communicator as well as for our CEO, because we had, as the morning progressed, about 28 minutes between the time we heard that NBC was on its way to the first of what would be about 8 hours of interviews. And every network, every publication, everyone paraded through here because they were trying to get at the bottom of this horrible story. So I had 28 minutes to get this CEO ready. My CEO is a brain surgeon. He's a brain surgeon who had the vision to create a network of very innovative hospitals, but he's a brain surgeon. He's not a communicator. And in 28 minutes, that's kind of a challenging time to give a crash course. Well, one of the realities I learned that day and why it was such a defining moment is when you only have 28 minutes, you kind of throw the book away in terms of how you prepare someone. Conventional thinking would be that you get the message points and they memorize the message points and they go out and they face the media on message. And I knew, and I know him well enough to know that if he had to do that, he would just be so paying attention to getting the words right that he would miss the point of the message. And so for 28 minutes, I just sat calmly with him and I said, let's talk about what's happened today, and let's talk about what it means to be a doctor, and let's talk about what it means to be a doctor when dealing with trauma. And trauma is certainly something that you're familiar with as a doctor, and it's certainly something that is happening today. And so I said, let's focus on your role as a healer, and how would you react to me if I needed to be healed? And so he talked, as we talked about, what it takes for people to feel healed, and they need to feel comfort, and they need to feel security, and they need to feel like somebody is available to them. All these feelings that make me feel like I'm healing. And I said, John, that's what your role is today. You are for the next whatever number of hours, you're the healer in chief. And I want you to put on your lab coat, and I want you to go out there, and I want you to heal people. And he did, and he went out, and he was fabulous. I hadn't read in a book how to make the most of those 28 minutes. I hadn't written a book. but I had been aware enough throughout all of my years doing this of what worked, and I cataloged it and I kept it in some ways that I'll talk about a little bit later, that instinct just took over, and I trusted that instinct. And so in that moment, that defining moment, both for him and for the organization and for me, I just instinctively knew that we did not have time to talk about the message. We needed to talk about the role, and that was the right call. Certainly, there are days we don't make the right call, but recognizing that there are defining moments that define who we are as communicators and what we can contribute, I think helps put the career pressure a little bit at rest, so we don't feel quite so concerned about, am I making this move or that move? If we don't reinvent ourselves, and if we aren't constantly looking at how we can get better, then we run the risk of being irrelevant. A little bit later, we'll talk through how to look at ourselves and how to look and see if we're remaining current and remaining relevant, but always realizing that in order to stay relevant is much more about understanding who we are trying to reach than necessarily the ins and outs of all the tools. I found myself a few years ago getting pretty frustrated when it just seemed at every conference or every publication or everything you had, you were just hearing more and more and more about, oh my goodness, we have to learn how to tweet, we have to learn how to post, and we have to learn all these things about technology. And I think that's great. We do have to understand technology. We do have to understand how to reach the people we're trying to reach. But what will get us into more conversations, again, back to those conversations we want to visualize ourselves being a part of, will be our understanding of the stakeholders we're trying to reach. And if there is a skill we must focus on, it's that ability to listen, and it's that ability to probe and to find things out that no one else can find. Now, when I started this gig, healthcare in America, as you've heard, is kind of a mess. And we are trying to find what the government's role should be, I think is an easy way to put it. So it's very confusing what consumers actually want. And I felt coming in here kind of fresh and having not grown up in this particular organization that the most important foundation of fact I could help us find is why people choose what they choose and what's the speed with which they choose and what influences how they choose. That insight into the people we're trying to reach proves so valuable. I use it every day because it makes such a difference. And that's why people are paying attention. It's because I'm focusing on a skill and sharpening a skill that will always be relevant. And we must learn to embrace trauma. Just as my boss learned how that day to embrace trauma, we have to embrace trauma. And we have to be able to help people stay calm during trauma and to manage the issues that may somehow be traumatic to the places where we work. So those are just kind of the big realities that we need to face as we plan a career. Let's jump into some of the essential qualities that we should bring, that we need to bring as communicators who are trying to plan this career for the long term. The first is persistence. It's not going to go as we always plan. I've been doing this for a whole long time, and I've had, I've just had some really big moments and some really bad moments and some kind of blah moments in between. And you just have to keep trudging and realize that we can't always measure our progress in major increments. Sometimes those increments are really small. Sometimes the things we achieve are quite minor. And it's not always a matter of getting the big things. It's a matter of managing the small ones and keep going. And so that persistence is something that I think can separate us from others who might not be as persistent. Perspective. The greatest thing about becoming slightly more experienced in our work is we can kind of tell if that trauma we're seeing is really a trauma, or if it's simply people acting dramatic. And many times we're surrounded by people who act dramatic, but that sense of perspective and understanding the relationships we're trying to manage. And so I think the key to perspective is to understand those relationships we are trying to help the organization manage, understanding those stakeholders, understanding what's important to them, so that we can determine if this is really a trauma or if this is not as big a deal. Because if we always listen to the people who bring us the crisis, everything's always a crisis. And I do like in the hospital business that you have these different colors of codes, and you know if you hear a code this or code this, exactly what the trauma is, exactly what the impact could be, and exactly what people need to do. And I think that is a product of perspective that we can certainly benefit from. There is no excuse for being sloppy. The need for precision is greater now than perhaps at any time because there are so many ways with electronic media to play gotcha. What we have to do is protect ourselves sometimes from how easy it is to communicate. How many of us are guilty at times of writing terse responses to an email while using a phone because we only have a few minutes and we let that urge to respond take over perhaps a bit of common sense. So that precision is not just a matter of the clarity of thought or the accuracy of what we're communicating. It's also the tone. I find many times that if I respond to an email on a phone, I am far more terse than I am when I take the time to reflect, to use perhaps something with a larger screen, and provide a more thoughtful response. So that precision is as much about the tone we convey as it is about the accuracy of what we're trying to convey. I think passion for what we do, for the importance of what we do, for the ultimate impact of what we do, it carries us through the bad moments more than anything, because we have to believe that ultimately this work has value to someone who we are trying to reach. So there have been times, and we all have these certain assignments that we think are just drudgery. There are certain things we're trying to do that just don't make any sense to us. And we have to find who is that person that I'm trying to reach. It's the same thing you hear famous performers say, that they always play to the back of the house, to that person in the last row. And there's always a last row that we need to be trying to reach no matter what we do. And ultimately, it takes patience. I remember at one point in my career, and I thought, I'm not moving ahead fast enough. They don't recognize me, and I had that kind of famous communicator chip on our shoulder. And someone just said, "Stop whining. Nobody wants to listen to you whine. Nobody wants to hear what it means to you. Just be patient and realize that if you focus on developing certain attributes and certain skills, you will find that it comes. You really do have to trust that ultimately you will be recognized, but don't always search for that recognition." And that was some great advice. So when we look at what those attributes that can be meaningful to the places we work, the first has to be a real strong sense of instinct. I always, when approached with a situation or a problem, I do believe in listening to yourself. I do believe in an instinct that is honed with experience and honed with good decisions and bad decisions, but that all contributes to just a radar to have an idea, a radar of having an idea of just knowing what it is that the problem really is. That ability to say, what problem is it that we are trying to solve, is as important an instinct to find the problem, to create a solution that actually matches the problem, than perhaps any other bag of tricks that we could bring. Because so many times, back to those conversations that we might imagine ourselves being in, so many times people don't really know what hurts. People don't know what they need, and we have to probe and we have to find it. And it's listening to other people and absorbing the clues that they may be expressing as a collection of symptoms that will contribute to the diagnosis that we might be able to deliver. That contributes to an ability to use good judgment. How many times are we presented with a problem, presented with a crisis, and we have to determine rather quickly how intense a solution is needed? If this is a code red or whatever the code that demands something very big and something very immediate, or if it is something that is less critical. That judgment is a direct result of the experience that we have and what we learn from that experience, as well as the instant that we may bring. Perhaps, though, the most important characteristic that we can acquire through the years is humility. None of us want to be around someone who always has to be the smartest one in the room. Our success and how we are viewed is going to be less about what people think of us and more about what people think of themselves when they're around us. So if I'm someone who encourages others, if I'm someone who is very curious about others, if I'm someone who is pulling it out of other people, not just finding it necessary to share my own wisdom, that is something very different. That is something very different than being someone who always has to be the smartest one. And that humility becomes, I think, pretty central to how engaging people think we are or how welcome we might be in certain discussions. That enables us to approach our career with a sense of ease, that perspective, that knowing it, if that promotion doesn't happen this year, as long as I am doing the right thing, the right things will happen to me. And it helps us not panic when something occurs that we can't necessarily predict. It also enables us to be bold. There is nothing more refreshing than to be in a room with people who just are fearless. There's something marvelously freeing about people who are just so willing to just jump out of the airplane and hope the chute goes off because they believe their instinct is so strong, their reasoning is so sound, their judgment is so precise. And so that fearlessness creates, and a client of mine once described this quality that I've always held on to that I really love, and that is, he said, you kind of have an informal formality. And I laughed and I thought I took that and I was very happy with that because there's a formality that came from a structure, that came from preparation, that came from precision. But the informality came from an ease, it came from a humility, and it certainly came from a fearlessness. And that combination, I think, worked for that particular situation and that particular relationship. As I've gone through over these years, different people I've worked with, there are certain things that I'm accused of hammering to them. And I have, over the years, kind of managed and developed and tried to inspire and certainly worked with a whole number of people who have meant a lot to me and who've gone on to do some really great things. And so I wrote some emails to them and asked them if there was one thing they got tired of me saying, what was it? But they still remembered, so it must have some sense to it. And here are the ones that they wrote. I'm always saying this is a business, not an art colony. And my reason for saying that is sometimes as communicators, we're our own worst enemy because we tend to focus too much on how creative we are. And we too much want to show people how creative we are. And sometimes we need to kind of put that into a realistic context that may be different than the way we approach things. And so I'm always telling people to look at the situation through the eyes of the people we're meeting with, not necessarily ourselves. And for most people, it is a business, and the art colony is something they might visit on weekends. Some days we get to do art, and a whole lot of other days we just pay rent. And I think longevity in this business is knowing which is which. And there are some situations we face that are utilitarian, that certainly demand sound thinking, but don't necessarily demand the most creative approach. Well, don't use all your creative muscles for something that doesn't really demand it, because you'll frustrate yourself and you'll frustrate who you're trying to work with. Save it for that which really needs a most creative approach. If we use it all up on everything we do, we won't have in our tank when we have that defining moment that really requires it. So I was just helping judge earlier today an awards competition, and we do this a lot, and we look at other people's work, and it was an award. It was a fascinating entry because the presenting problem was really big, really high profile, had great impact, and it could have really been something special. And it was greeted with or treated with the most boring approach I think I've read in a long time. And I just read this going, oh my goodness, this has to get interesting after I turn the page. And it was just boring. And the communicator had done such a great job of sizing up the problem, but it was almost like they had used all their energy on the problem and hadn't really saved it for the solution. And I think it was because, and I didn't know quite how to suggest this in the commentary, that they were approaching every problem as though it was the Sistine Chapel, and that had dulled their ability to see when something was really special. And so what I got was a response or an approach that sounded really tired. The person sounded tired. It sounded like a tired response. And we can all tell the difference when we're really awake and alive and excited about something versus, oh my goodness, I just want it to be over. Sometimes we need to pull back and invest less in something so that when we have those opportunities for art, we can invest more. Only when we confront what we're afraid of can we really progress. And I do think that is as important to our pushing ahead as anything can be. I've had moments in my career of great disappointment when jobs didn't happen, or a company I worked for got bought and I wasn't asked to continue. Things happen. And you can use those moments and get terribly upset and get terribly frightened and go, oh my goodness, I'm going to feel sorry for myself. Or you can say, what am I most afraid of? And I'm going to conquer that fear. I found myself a few years ago, life had changed and I was thrown into a different situation, and I would ask myself, what am I most afraid of? Well, what I was most afraid of was that people would think I didn't have anything current anymore. And this is, I could go out and become a social media expert, but there were already plenty. And I thought, what are the conversations that I wish I could have? Well, I looked back and I cataloged a lot of work I had done, and I certainly had an idea of what I enjoyed the most, what gave me the most energy. And I really asked myself, what conversations or what meetings or what work do I do that I actually am more excited and alive when it's done than when it starts? And it was always the coaching and the counseling of CEOs. That every time I got to that point in the project, I just was the most excited about it because it was such a, it's kind of like climbing up the ladder. And I realized that I loved that. And I could picture myself actually spending time doing that. And I thought, well, I really want to do that. Well, you can't just open the door and say, hello, I do CEOs. You can't just do that. So I said, I have to learn something. And so I embarked upon several months of interviewing a whole range of CEOs about what was most important to them. And it's very easy, actually, to get on the phone many times, but sometimes in person, these kind of interviews, because I didn't say I'm a communicator. I didn't say I am trying to figure out what I'm doing with the rest of my life. They wouldn't really enjoy that too much. But I did, contract to do some writing, and I was writing a story. And many times when you're writing a story and you're doing research, it becomes very easy. And that was true. And it was very easy to get these discussions if you find the CEO's assistant and explain what you're trying to do. And you always ask, in my case, I always ask for a 40-minute appointment. And the reason I ask for a 40-minute appointment is nobody asks for a 40-minute appointment, But assistants really love 40-minute appointments because that really means they can block the whole hour, and they give their boss 20 minutes of unscheduled time, which is golden in most of these people's lives who just go from meeting to meeting to meeting. Anyway, I learned so much from these conversations about how CEOs react to communicators, how they react to communication. It was like going to school in what we needed to be relevant, and in many cases how far away from what we need to be I even would see myself being. It really did change a lot of how I looked at myself and what made sense, and as a result, it really did kind of cause me to do a big right turn and do things a little bit differently. That wouldn't have happened if I hadn't confronted my fear, and so that's absolutely critical, as is the ability to turn any kind of lemon we get into lemonade. American expression, all about taking a disaster and making it work. We can't always turn the disaster around in the present time. We can learn from it, and we can absolutely use it as the foundation for doing something differently. And that's that ability to learn and to absorb. And then my favorite, which is start with the truth and then start to edit. We have to live within our own truth. Our own truth is that if we aren't constantly trying to reinvent ourselves, if we aren't constantly looking at our skills, if we aren't constantly saying, this is what I want to be, that career is not going to happen. And if we celebrate the present. I have a good friend who I just kind of coached as he was looking for a new job. He got the new job with this big company in the States. And then he says, oh, Mark, now I got to plot for my next job. And I said, you just got this job. Can't we take a breather? And maybe it would be a good idea to do this job before you actually start to plot for the second. I said, on the other hand, I want you to really focus on what you need to get rid of in order to do this job. And this is what I would call the process of looking inside and reinventing ourselves. And it has 3 steps that I would like to take us through right now, and then we'll open it up for questions. The first is, much like a closet in my house that gets too messy, or a bookcase that gets too full, every now and then when it comes to how we do our work, we just need to clean out the place so that we can declutter, because we're letting things get in the way and they use up our battery life. My favorite thing about my iPhone, even though I'm mad at my iPhone, the favorite thing, the very cleansing thing I feel is when you do that function and you get rid of all the pages that are opening that take your battery. Well, we all have pages in our lives that are taking our battery, and we just need at times to declutter. Well, there are 3 steps that we can follow to declutter. The first and perhaps most important, certainly the most exhaustive, is to document how we do what we do. And that is actually saying, if I have a story to write, here are the steps that I follow. And I might research, I might telephone, I might gather, I might fret, whatever it is. What are those steps that I have to put myself through in order to actually get the thing done? As we mentioned at the beginning, my kind of casual thing is I write movie reviews, and I take it really seriously, but I write movie reviews. And I have a specific process that I write movie reviews. And I realized I picked up the paper, because I'm still printed in a newspaper, with ink, and I read my review, and I said, that is the most boring thing I've ever read. Well, then I looked myself, and I said, no wonder it's boring. I have followed the same routine to create my reviews for however many years. And no wonder they're boring, because I'm doing it the same way. And so unless we document how we work, we can't discard what's getting in the way or what isn't working, and then we have to deny ourselves to return to old habits. And so as I looked at why my movie reviews were boring, I realized that I was going to the movies the same way. I would sit in the movies with my notebook, and I would write about things as they happened. And then I would go back through my notes. Something, if you ever see movie critics at a movie, that's what they all do. And then I realized that is so stupid. If I don't have enough brain cells to remember the key parts of the movie for the hour or so after I write the review, when I write the review, then I'm not worth much. And so I got rid of my notebook, and I said, I'm just going to sit back and enjoy the movie as though I were going to the movies on purpose, and it gave me a completely freshened look at what the experience should be. And that only happened because I dared to declutter what was getting in the way. With all that bandwidth that we acquire because we've decluttered, then we can declare, this is what I want to be. These are the conversations that I want to have. This is the kind of work I want to do. This is the kind of impact that I want to create. And the 3 steps that we can follow for this to happen is first to think through and say, this is what I want to be, and to make a picture in my mind. I made a picture in my mind that I want to be the CEO whisperer who gets to the bottom of why that CEO can't communicate. I was on an airplane one day, and I was talking to this guy, and it turned out he was a producer of reality television shows. And when I told him what I did, and he said, oh, I see a television show. And I said, I hate the undercover boss. And he said, no, not that at all, but I don't see that. But what I do see are conversations that I want to be having. Then I think after we have visualized it in that manner, we document it and we say, what is it really that can work? What is it that can work? And what is it that I need to do for it to work? And what kind of skills must I bring in order for that to work? And so when I would kind of visualize these conversations, I would say, there are certain degrees or certain aspects of business I need to get smarter about so I can ask those kinds of questions. For example, I didn't know what a supply chain really did, but every business leader in every interview always refers to it. And so there were certain things that I had to get smarter about. And so by discovering or sensing or visualizing what I wanted to be, and then documenting what that actually was, it helped me identify the skills or the sub-skills that I needed to develop in order to actually accomplish what it is that I hope to accomplish. And then ultimately, it is all about how we deliver and what we actually do to get things done. And this is where we have in our brains so many cobwebs that at times just need to be cleared out. And so when we look at what it is that we want to be, then we need to detail each operational step it's going to take so that we can accomplish. Then we have to say, okay, these are certain things that I need other people to do, if there are other people who can do, and delegate those things that I don't need necessarily to be the one that needs to do it. And then every time after we get something done, we debrief what worked and what didn't work. Because only when we're honest with ourselves and kind of celebrate that truth can we actually learn. And so I have a question from one of the people listening. What sort of time frame does it take to do the decluttering process? And would you declutter regularly or as needed? Well, first of all, when I've taken groups through the decluttering process for like a function, it's like a day. Let's say it's a day, it may be a part of a day. I don't think we need to spend like the rest of our lives decluttering. But I do think it's something that I kind of do every quarter. I do spend time every quarter, every 3 months. It doesn't take a day every 3 months, but I do take a couple of hours every 3 months, and I have documented throughout. And I go back to a calendar is a great way to look at it. And you go, why did I go to that meeting, and what did I really accomplish? And I could have gotten rid of that. And there's a pretty practical result from this for me. Is now that all the calendaring is done electronically, we can book ourselves and nobody can book us during the time we booked for ourselves. I've gotten really good about booking time for myself because for example, it just dawned on me that I hate meetings at 8 o'clock in the morning. I hate them because I wake up at 6 and I'm already like, I have to go do this at 8. I just hate it. If a meeting is at 9, I just feel much more of a sense of ease and everything. So you know what? If you looked at my calendar, you would see DNB, do not book, every day from 8 to 9. And that means if I want to read the paper that morning, I do. Now, I certainly work hard, and I certainly get things done, and I certainly am available. But I just protect that time, and that came from this process, so that I am constantly, I think, kind of decluttering. But I do make certain that I do it every quarter or so. We also have a question that says, would you recommend using mind maps? I love mind maps. I don't know if I do them correctly, but I do what I think is a mind map. I love to, and when I do this, and if I was, I wish that I could draw right now, and I would show you what that mind map could be. I would put myself at the center, and then I would immediately draw the first layer of spokes, if you will, if I was the hub, to those people I want to talk to. So I want to talk to my CEO several times every day. And then I would imagine who else is talking to that CEO and who else I want to talk to who's talking to that CEO. And so I would build it more in terms of what is the outcome, who do I want to talk with. When I envision who I want to talk with and who I want to help, it just kind of helps. And so I think that kind of mind map is actually really, really helpful. So as we wrap up, and then please just keep sending, or we'll open up the lines and asking any questions. There are just, I think, some really important lessons for all of us to keep in mind, no matter where in our careers we are. Stimulate our curiosity. If you're a reader, make yourself read a book. There's something about mastering a book that's really exciting. I think the more that we read, the more that we go to lectures, the more that we learn things we don't know. It just helps so much. That's why I still do my movie reviews, because it forces me to think about something different. Always find a mentor. And, we think of mentors as always someone older than we are. That's silly. I have several mentors who are like young, who keep me fresh and who tell me if I'm crazy, and they certainly tell me if I'm acting my age, which I absolutely hate. We have to feed ourselves. We have to feed our souls, and that's where we have to just give ourselves a break and realize this isn't easy. If it was easy, everyone could do it. It doesn't matter that everyone thinks they can do it. Everyone could do it if it was easy. This is very difficult. And so one of the things I do to feed my soul, and this is really silly and my family thinks it's crazy, I don't know if any of you have ever watched the old American show now, the West Wing, which is about 10 years ago. And it is a great depiction of communicators because it's all in the White House in the U.S. I watch an episode of the West Wing sometimes to feed my soul because it becomes a way to remind myself of what this all can be. I just had a question about if I would recommend any resources or books on this topic. What a great question. I can't say, but I'm going to think about that, and I have your name, and I'll send you a note. I can't think of necessarily. I can't think of, but what I would suggest you do. I've become a real fan of Google blog alerts, and I probably have too many, and they fill my mailbox. But I love the whole manner in which the positive dimensions of Google can help find things. And so I would just do a Google blog search, and there are people who are writing about careers and such things all the time, I would think. But no, I really don't. But I think if you do that, and one of the things that I would do, I always keep track of all the different announcements that come in of different kind of seminars. I mean, you could go to seminars every day if you wanted to, and then I'll Google those people and find out if they've written or if they blog or things like that. I think we have to nourish connections, and this is where IABC is just so valuable. There are people who I've known for over 35 years who are just touchstones to me professionally and personally, and we have to nourish those connections because those are the people who will help provide the perspective. And those are people who will absolutely remind us who we are and remind us when it's starting to go, and then finally to work from the heart. There is a lady who I actually have written with named Libby Sartain wrote a marvelous book called HR from the Heart. And even though it's about HR, it's just still one of my favorite books because it's about finding your own kind of inner peace about what you do and contributing that and blending that with the practicalities of a career. And I think that's what keeps us going, and I think that's what keeps us fresh. I wouldn't, as you age in your profession or age in your life, don't apologize for that, because you earned those lines and you earned those gray hairs and you earned that experience, and it all feeds into the judgment that you bring. So don't ever apologize for that. And with that, I'm going to say, Mary, let's open it up, and any questions or anything or thoughts, or you can, Mary, I'll turn it over to you, and you can tell us how to do that.
Okay, great. If you have a question, you can just type it into the Q&A box there on the bottom right corner, and I'll read it off. And we do have a question from Zora. What would you recommend using? Oh, we already said that.
Yeah, we've already done those three. Yeah.
Zora. Okay. Whoops, that's all we have then. Let's ask some questions, folks.
Any questions or thoughts, comments?
Yeah. Not seeing any coming up. Well, did you have anything else to add, Mark?
No. If any of you, as you kind of think through some of this, if it would be helpful, just drop me a line, and I'll be glad to provide any response or talk about anything over email that might be helpful.
Here's one. What is your advice for those who are transitioning from marketing into communications?
Well, it's funny. I've just, this gig that I'm doing is a blend of marketing and communications, and I think that I would just remind yourself that it's the same ball game. You're just playing a different position. I strongly believe that an organization needs to have one message, and sometimes that organization's going to buy the attention to that message in conventional advertising. Sometimes it's going to try to influence getting attention through what we might call traditional PR, and sometimes it's going to create the channels to communicate the message. I think the reality of the world is, with media the way it is now, that you can't separate those three. And so in the organization I'm in right now, and we look at our marketing buys, we're going to buy media very differently than we have in the past, and we're going to buy a lot of what I call the advertorial content or purchase content, because the available space in the traditional PR game is limited, and advertising in our space, at least, is considered less effective. So we're going to put more emphasis in how we purchase opportunities for people to see our content. So I think it requires our saying, there is a message. There is a message. And then saying, what is the best way to disseminate it. So in this organization, we've actually brought marketing and communications together, because the organization was just confusing the public by having these functions separate. So it's been a challenge, but it's been a healthy challenge. Okay,
we have another question from Natalie. And as an Australian citizen, how would I go about securing work in the States to build my experience and credibility, particularly New York City?
Well, since I work a lot in New York City, and I have no idea how those various things work as far as what the United States requires from documentation, so I apologize for that. I think the first step is to identify those organizations at home that may have operations in New York City that might have an opportunity to work with them in a field situation. I did a lot of work for Total, the French oil company, but working for it in the States. And there were many times that we would hear, and I was kind of the interim head of communications, but there were many times that we would hear from people in France who might have an interest or might have a need coming to the States, and it became something of that nature, whether they were employees or vendors. So I think starting with companies in Australia that you know are somehow either interested in or doing work in the States, that would be a great place to start, because then you would be using your strength as an opportunity to stretch yourself.
Okay, we have a comment from Louise who says, I would also recommend looking at the global IABC website and Mark's website for more inspiration and resources. So thank you, Louise. Here's another comment from Tim, or question. Have you seen the appetite of organizations move towards generalist communicators rather than specialist communicators, i.e. dedicated internal media PR specialists, so that resources are more cross-functional?
Yeah, I think, Tim, that is a great question. Actually, before this call, I was on the phone with a friend who is redesigning the function for a company where he works, and we had this very discussion. I think the wall between internal and external, if it's not completely gone, it's pretty close to gone. And my reason for saying that, we might pretend to say that we're doing something for internal consumption, but we're really naive if we don't realize that anything we're doing can be consumed by people, no matter where they are. So that's really kind of naive for us to assume that we can separate the stakeholder groups in that manner. I think that in the old days, when I could be a specialist, was a luxury that today doesn't provide, because first of all, organizations don't have staffs filled with specialists. They have fewer people, and they need people who can be one thing one day, one thing another, one thing another. So there isn't the luxury of being able to only be a specialist. It's also not necessarily practical. Instead, what we need to be looking at is, how do I help an organization manage the issues that are confronting the stakeholders? And so that requires that I be broad to really understand those issues. Then as we look at how we're going to address those issues on Monday might require one set of interventions, on Tuesday a different set, on Wednesday a different set, and we don't have the luxury of having all different kinds of people. So I think it requires us to be, as the old expression, a jack of all trades, because that's just the way the world is. And so I feel, as someone who still wants to be relevant in this business, I need to be able to fly at a whole bunch of altitudes and land at a whole bunch of places.
Okay, thank you. Catherine says, hi, Mark. Do you think qualifications in something like psychology or organizational psychology would be beneficial in a communications career, or could you develop this kind of insight in other ways?
Well, I think that if you're arriving in a career or have in your career this kind of background, Lord knows there's a bunch of people we work with who need therapy, so I think that would be great. I think any kind of educational background you bring, regardless of what it is, if it is something that is directly applicable or something that might be on surface a little bit more distant, it's only as valuable as how you use it. So if you are a psychologist who comes into communications and you can demonstrate to me that brings a viewpoint that is different, that is valuable, that is unique, then I'm going to be all over it. I'm going to say that is just the best thing I've ever experienced. But if it's something that is you keep kind of off to the side, then it won't be as effective. I think you can be an effective communicator from any background. And I think if you're looking at ways to stretch yourself, the stretching of yourself to reach other things is very, very valuable.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, I'm not seeing any more questions. Oh, here's one. From Catherine, thanks, Mark. How can you be more influential and a more influential communicator?
I think that that's a big question and an important question. I think there are some fundamental components. I think understanding and knowing the stakeholders better than anybody else, or as well as anyone else, and knowing what's going to move them, what's going to change them, what they think, what they want, so that knowledge of the audience is going to get you into any conversation. Because the conversations you want to be in is when someone has an idea, they want to be able to point to you, Catherine, and say, hey, Catherine, how would people react to that? So that understanding of the knowledge is one. I think the understanding of the issues and the ability to get underneath the issues. I work with a woman now who's just incredible. She can read the paper, and she studies the narrative between the various parts of the paper, and she really understands the issues that are confronting the stakeholders and where we could get caught. So it's not looking at the issues in terms of how it affects us, because that's kind of self-serving. It's what is happening that affects the people we're trying to serve, and how can we make a difference in that regard. And then I think it's a matter of really understanding the realities of an industry. I've been really lucky in my life that I started my professional life in the airline business, and I've worked for a lot of airlines. Then I have done many, many things working with many hospitals, and I've also worked a lot in oil and gas. And that kind of gives me three industries that I can pretty much have any conversation about and know what questions to ask, or know enough questions to ask. And that makes a huge difference, because that is an expertise. And when we feel confident, or when we feel like we can handle that, that brings an ease that puts others at ease. So I think that industry is the other place where I think we have an opportunity to differentiate.